Welcome to the Mokuchi Studio podcast, the podcast dedicated to Japanese woodworking and related topics. I am your host, Jan Giguère, and today we have joining us from Maine, Douglas Brooks, a boat builder, writer, and researcher. Welcome, Douglas.
Thank you very much.
How are you?
I'm good.
Great, great, great. You're joining us from Maine, I believe now.
Right.
Although you're still technically living in Vermont.
Yes. Still based in Vermont. Yes.
Mhm. But you're in Maine, planning to move there at some point, yeah?
Yes. My wife and I are building a small place on some land we bought a few years ago. And eventually, yes, we will relocate to Maine.
Wonderful. What part of Maine?
The town of Bristol, the region, it's considered mid-coast Maine.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So we're midway between Rockland and Brunswick.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Bristol is the nearest big town is Damariscotta. So
It sounds like you won't have to drive far to come to the festival this summer.
that's correct. I will be actually from the festival. I'll be coming right back over here to teach a boat building workshop at the Carpenter's Boat Shop, which is a small boat building school, and that was really my first real introduction to Maine. Was becoming a part-time teacher there back in 2010.
Interesting. Interesting, yeah. Then you and I was trying to remember when we first met. I think it might have been at a presentation you gave at the Japan Society in New York City.
I didn't realize you were there. Yeah.
When
Okay.
there were many people around. I was just a one one more spectator. I think that's where we first met. Your most known book, The Japanese Wooden Boat Building, had just come out, and you were giving a presentation about the book and your studies. And I believe that is when I first saw you. And we
Mm,
spoke very briefly. Of course, you were just surrounded by everybody
mm.
wanted to talk with you, of course. And I think it's after that I reached out, and maybe that year or the following year, you graciously came to the NYC KES that I was hosting at the time, and
That's
then
right. Yeah.
presented and demonstrated. Yeah, so I
Hmm.
believe that was the time. But it was yeah, so that was good memories.
Hmm.
Yeah, everybody loved the presentation, and to be able to see up close the demonstration was great. You've been very busy before and since. I see that you put out a number of books.
And I've continued to study with different Japanese boat builders, and this past winter had an interesting experience. I got invited to take part in a barrel making symposium in Japan. Very interesting group of younger barrel makers, really quite literally trying to save that craft. And I had the good fortune to have them invite me to join them and help them build two 7 foot tall soy sauce barrels on Shodoshima, an island in the inland sea. So
Oh, wow.
was there for about 10 days in
Wow.
January into February.
Yeah, I did see a few posts on Instagram,
Hmm.
and it made me think about uh, was it somewhat connected with actually you wrote a book also on the tub boats of Sado Island,
Hmm.
and I wonder if the techniques have to be very similar to barrel making, except it's just the bottom half. I mean,
Well,
there's got to
yeah,
be differences, but
they are very yes, and it was directly related to that because it turns out that my book on how to build the tugboats is is pretty much the only thing published on traditional Japanese cooperage. And I didn't know that at the time. And after the publication of the books, I actually heard from several barrel makers from throughout Japan, and they all owned copies of the book, and they were all pretty impressed with what I had managed to document there.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I've been on their radar for a long time, and that's how I got the invitation. Um,
Mm.
I did stop by for a single day back in 2017 at this event, and it was pretty new at that point. And it was much smaller than it is now. So it's something that's been growing, but I'm very interested in it simply as a response to the loss of craft in Japan, and how another way for the Japanese to try to keep a craft alive. So it's a very public event. They're very open to people joining them, really anybody joining them that's interested. It was really fascinating, because the tradition, the kind of the old world tradition in Japan is relatively exclusive. The craftspeople probably spend more time keeping people out than letting people in.
Mm, mm.
So this was great to see, a great new generation of craftspeople. So yeah, and the tugboats are very similar. It's classic Japanese barrel making. Really, the only difference in the tugboat is that the bottom is slightly curved, and in Japanese
Ah.
barrels, that's not the case. They're perfectly flat.
Mm.
Yeah.
So the bottom of the tugboats are curved. Are they curved in one direction, or
No,
is
they're
it?
actually curved in both directions. It's very tricky, and actually, it's a funny thing because it really stumps the barrel makers, and several of them have
Mm.
talked to me about it and really feel like, wow, that's just impossible. How do you do that? And the way you do it is, if you can imagine, you're making a bottom out of straight planks,
Mhm.
but when you join their edges, you leave a slightly widening gap as the
Ah.
seam comes to the outer edge.
Mm.
Okay. And so when you drive the bottom in,
Mm.
there's tremendous force. There's this tremendous pressure created by the hoops, the bamboo
Mhm.
hoops.
Mhm.
And as those bottom planks are squished together, because of the way you've prepared those seams, they come together in a kind of very slight saucer shape.
Ah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, the explanation that I just gave probably doesn't convince anyone that that works, but it does.
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. I believe you. Seems like you were there. You saw it.
I did.
I.
I saw it. I did it. And yeah. But otherwise, every other step, I mean, there's a few subtle differences. The braiding of the bamboo hoops, they're between my teacher and the barrel makers I was working with, there was a bit of difference, but by and large, it's straight up Japanese barrel making.
Mm. When I was mentioning if it's which way it's curved, for a moment I thought it might be if it was shaped differently. I thought it might be slightly curved in along it, sort of like the hull of a boat is curved in one direction to facilitate the movement in one direction.
Right.
But on the tugboats, it's just it's round in all evenly
Yes,
in
and
all
I should
direction.
point out, I should point out too, I forgot to mention that as you're shaping the seam, you're also shaping the seam in a slight V,
Mm.
okay?
Mm.
So that it also cups from side to side.
Ah,
So
yes,
it
yes,
cups
yes.
front to back and it cups side to side. And the final thing I should say is the tub boat is not round, it's oval. So the tugboat
Ah,
has a kind of, bow and stern.
ah,
So
wow, yeah, that is in pictures. That is. not something that caught my eye. Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
it's a pretty subtle oval. I mean,
Mm,
if you see my drawings of
mm,
the tugboat,
mm-hmm.
you instantly see the oval. And
Ah,
there's a number of Japanese buckets and barrels that are oval shaped. So that's not
mm,
particularly unusual. So,
mm. Yeah, I remember, my goodness, when I was studying woodworking some 30 years back now, I thought I saw an article in Fine Woodworking or something like that on tugboats of Japan. And so I started looking back to see, like, my goodness, was that you from back then? Because I could not remember who wrote what I saw, and maybe I got my memory confused, and it was in a book and not a magazine.
hmm,
But I had seen one little bit of writing, like 3 or 4 pages or something.
hmm. Well,
Um,
I published a feature article in Wooden Boat magazine on the
hmm,
tugboats and my work there. I published that. That was published in 1997. You might
mm,
have seen that, and I'll send
maybe,
you a
maybe,
copy, and
maybe.
you can see if you recognize it.
Yeah, I thought, yeah, as I was researching, I thought, wait a minute, like trying to connect dots from way back.
Mm,
um, yeah, but that's the only thing I had ever seen on boat building, and even in within the Japanese boat building, that one is also extra unusual, I think.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of ironic. That was my first apprenticeship, and I came home grateful for the experience, which was amazing, but slightly chagrined because I still hadn't I still hadn't built a quote unquote real boat. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Oh, interesting. But you did get into so many other boats
yes,
later on. Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes,
At
yes.
this point, I've studied with 9 different boat builders from throughout Japan,
Wow.
and that's from between 1996 and 2019.
Mm,
And I'm actually currently trying to raise funding to study with a boat builder in Hiroshima. So that would be my 10th apprenticeship, if you want to call it that.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, yeah, trying to
Wow.
find enough funding to get over and do that.
So funding. How does that work?
Well, so in my case, I self funded my first 2 apprenticeships, and then I was very fortunate, and then I began to talk to foundations, and both in Japan and the United States, and I was very fortunate in the year 2001, I believe. I reached, well, the Freeman Foundation, that at that time was based in Vermont, reached out to me, interested in my work. And that conversation took well over a year, but it led to my first major research grant. And that's still actually my largest single research grant. And they gave me over $100,000, which allowed me to go to Japan for an entire year and
Wow.
study with a boat builder in Tokyo. I was with him for almost 7 months, and then research travel. My wife and I drove 8,000 miles of the Japanese coastline
Wow.
and looking for boat builders. And I think I found 42 boat builders. And then we finished up in northern Japan in Aomori Prefecture, where I apprenticed with a boat builder there. So I built a total of 3 boats that year and did a tremendous amount of research, interviewing boat builders, photographing boats. So yeah, so that was my first, the first support that I got,
Mm,
and it gave me some credibility, and also it allowed me to publish more of my research. And yeah, I've managed to, I think the total I've managed to raise over the last 25 years is about $400,000 to support my research. But that's really the hardest part of what I do, sad to say,
mm,
is
mm.
trying to get the funding to go and do the research and documentation and publishing that I want to
Mm.
do.
I, as a researcher, I guess
Mm.
that is part of the game, no?
That is
Yeah,
part of the game. And
yeah,
it is a game.
yeah. Well, yeah, 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 yeah. Hopefully, it's fun, like playing a game, but
Oh,
it's
okay.
a
Thank
it's a
you.
ton of work, a ton of work. Yes. Yeah, yeah. Because so you wear many hats now.
I do.
Uh,
Yes, I do.
is you are in boat builder. It's not just writing about. You're a boat builder, and you write about them. You research, and you teach as well.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and teaching is has taken up an increasing amount of my time. It's really quite sobering. Beginning in 1996 with my first apprenticeship, all my teachers were in their 70s and 80s, and most of them at this point have passed away. And
Mm.
they really represented a last generation of boat builders because they were the post-war generation, and there was not a generation of apprentices after that. So, one of the more sobering realities of my work is, as I've mentioned, I've had 9 teachers. I'm the sole apprentice for 7 of my 9 teachers.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So, I mean, those 9 people only taught 2 other boat builders and me. Um,
Mm.
so, so that really points to the need to document the craft because the craftspeople didn't write anything, usually didn't write anything down, and where they left any documentation, it was always incomplete because they were trying to protect their secrets. So it's
Mm.
completely different than in the West. And it was one of the
Mm.
things one of the very first things that struck me on my first trip to Japan, talking to the very first boat builders I met, was just shaking my head and thinking, back in America, I have bookshelves groaning with boat building books. And
Mm.
this culture has none of that,
Mm.
because the practitioners you don't write anything down and don't reveal anything.
Mm.
So that's that's been a very strong impetus to my work, is realizing that you have to catch the craftspeople before they're gone in order to learn this stuff. So
Yeah, yeah, and if I think quickly, any of the Japanese woodworking literature I've come across uh, is all. I mean, none of it has been written by the actual woodworkers.
right,
There was
that
there was
that's correct.
somebody in the periphery interested, gained access somehow to
Mm.
to the busy life of tradespeople, and then got to write about some, whether it was first in Japanese or first in English.
Well, I think also it's true that a lot of, I mean, some of the finest books on Japanese crafts are written by foreigners too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Many of them.
yeah.
Um, but you're right, and I know that in my own experience with boat building in Japan, because I know a lot of maritime scholars in Japan, and their interest is primarily, history, ethnography, economics, and
Ah,
I found very few, almost no researchers that actually want to focus on the craft itself. And it's
mm,
again, for me, a very odd situation because here in America, there were several really noted maritime curators, some of whom actually were boat builders, were professional boat builders, but all of them had a real grounding in boat building, and it may be a Western thing, it may be a more of an American thing, but there was an instant realization that preserving the craft itself was every bit as important as preserving the artifacts or studying the history. But in Japan, I just haven't found that to be the case. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look across Europe, Australia, New Zealand, North America, and so many maritime museums have working boat shops, and we have boat building schools as well. And
Mm-hmm.
that's completely unknown in Japan. And in fact, the
Yeah.
woodworking schools we see, and there are more and more cropping up in Japan, that's a very, very new idea. And it's a Western import.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I would think so. Both a Western import, and there seems to be a shift in a shift in consciousness, in awareness, let's say, where like in Japan, doing something else than your full-time occupation is a new thing.
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Hobbies did not used to exist.
Right.
I
Uh, yeah. I
mean,
mean,
not
yeah. Yes.
not and not as we know them.
Correct.
It's very common to have, like for me, as I teach woodworking in class, it's not all professional. In
Right.
fact, most students are picking up woodworking to balance out their life. And
Hmm.
they might be sitting at a desk most of the time and then use woodworking as instead of going to the gym, or instead of something grounding, something physical, something to balance out their life. That is not something that is traditionally was done in Japan.
Mm.
Whatever you did was your whole life.
Yeah, it was all consuming.
There
Yes.
was no spare time for anything else. Any time something like spare time would appear, then socially the pressure would be to reinvest in what you're doing,
Hmm.
and go further and better yourself, and because you would stand out in traditional Japan by excelling at what you do, not by doing something else or something different. Uh, so I am very grateful though for that shift.
Mm.
We lose one thing, but then we gain other things. So those crafts, I'd rather have them around than not, for sure. So how did you get interested in the first place? Because you were a boat builder. You started
Hmm.
out as a boat builder,
No,
or
yes and no. I grew up around boats. My family always had boats, and my father was a house carpenter, so I grew up with tools and woodworking.
mm,
While I was in college, I got to do a program at Mystic Seaport Museum, which is, by some measures, the largest maritime museum in the world, certainly the largest maritime museum in North America. And while I was there, in this undergraduate program, I got to apprentice, a very kind of a quasi apprenticeship with the museum boat builder. And he and I
mm,
and a couple other students, we built a small replica boat together. And I'd always loved boats, and that definitely created a spark in me. I also worked in boat yards, summer jobs and that sort of thing. So post college, I moved to the Bay Area, and I did a variety of things, just trying to survive. I worked in construction, and I actually taught remedial writing. And then I got a job at the Maritime Museum in San Francisco, and they were just establishing a museum boat shop. And so I stuck with that, and eventually I became the museum boat builder at the Maritime Museum
mm,
there. And so we were building replica boats. We were documenting historic boats in the museum's collection. We were collecting historic boats, and we were teaching traditional boat building. So, and I really felt like I'd fallen into a dream job, and I was
mm,
really convinced this is what I wanted to do. But after 5 years there in 1990, for a variety of other reasons, I decided to leave the museum. And at that time, one of my college roommates, who was from Japan and had become a very close friend, he invited me to Japan. And so I went. I was free and I could do that. And on that first trip to Japan, I met several boat builders. In fact,
Mm,
my very first day in Tokyo, I met a man who claimed to be an eighth generation boat builder.
mm,
He was quite well known. His name was Sano, and his son is still carrying on. He's the ninth generation, and that alone was kind of mind blowing to me. That lineage.
mm,
But as I traveled around Japan, I sort of was the typical backpacker tourist, seeing the major tourist sites. But I was also going off to the side and traveling the coastline and meeting boat builders. And I eventually I went out to Sado Island. I actually had a magazine photo showing a tubboat.
mm,
And I really didn't believe they existed. So I decided to go out to Sado Island and see for myself. And I count on that first trip, I counted almost 300 tubboats in the 6 fishing villages around this one peninsula where they're used. And then I met the last 2 craftspeople building them. And
mm,
that was incredible. Um,
mm.
and I was determined to come back. And 2 years later, I came back to Japan and I took an interpreter out to Sado. One of those boat builders had passed away, but the last remaining boat builder, we spent a long weekend and I was trying to interview him. And I was trying to document him in a format like you and I sitting here now. And he just had no language to talk about it. Every time I asked him a question, he would just jump up and say, well, let's go out to the workshop and I'll show you.
Mm, mm,
And
mm,
and as we kept doing that and going back and forth, I began to realize, the only way to do this is to work alongside him, is to get
mm,
inside this as an apprentice. I can't do this sitting outside as someone with a notebook
mm,
and a
mm,
camera. And he and I had the same thought because on my third trip, and again, I took an interpreter and went to see him. Before I left the island on that third trip, he asked me to come back and be his apprentice.
ah,
And that's so in 1996, my fourth trip to Japan, my wife and I traveled to Sado and lived with he and his wife. And he and I built a tugboat together. And it was an amazing experience.
wow.
But what I learned in that first apprenticeship, which would be replicated from there from there on, um, the first day he made me sit in a stool and do nothing but watch him. And for eight
Mm,
hours, I watched him planing staves. And he didn't say a word to me. And at the end of the day, he jumped up, he pointed to the shavings, he said, "Clean the shop and shut the door." And he walked out. And then the second day started the same way. And I think it was partway through the second day, sometime in the afternoon, I'd been watching him for a day and a half playing staves. And he suddenly jumped up and pointed to the pillow that he'd been sitting at on the floor and said, "Work." And he walked out of the shop. And this was, a rude introduction to apprentice learning in Japan, where the apprentice learns by observation and by
mm,
observation only.
mm,
And though some of my teachers, some more so than others, invited me to ask questions, I was not welcome to ask questions in the workshop. I
ah,
had to wait until break time. That
mm,
while we were working, we worked.
mm,
There was no interrupting the master. But what this does is it shifts all the pressure onto the apprentice because you've got to watch your master like a hawk. Whether
mm,
you may be sweeping, you may be fetching, you may be sharpening, but at the same time you've got to keep one eye on them. because when you're called to do the work, if you don't perform it perfectly, you're handed the broom and sent back to the beginning. And that's happened to me. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a fascinating kind of pedagogy, and it's had a great deal of influence on my own teaching. In fact, I've developed a university class where we build a Japanese boat together, but we do so in nearly complete silence. My goal in that class is to create as quickly as possible the completely silent workshop.
Mm. And how is that? I've experienced it, so I know how great it is. But but I wonder how it is. How is it received? Are people struggling with that? Do you
So
take like
students,
do you ask people
yeah.
to put their cell phones away, or what's the?
Oh well, phones are completely forbidden. No,
Mm,
absolutely forbidden from the workshop.
mm,
And students are initially terrified by this idea, but but they have to adapt to it. I'm putting them in. I'm putting in. I describe it in some ways that the Japanese boat builder, creates this kind of crucible, this really intense environment, and the apprentice has to rise to the occasion. You don't have any choice. And as I say to my students sometimes when the moment's appropriate, I say, I refuse to save you.
mm,
And that's what they're all used to.
mm,
That's what our teaching method, because of course my class, I'm trying to contrast. I want them to see the contrast with the way they've been taught since the beginning, since kindergarten. Um, and the teacher and the resources have always been there to catch them. And
mm,
as a result, what the number one comment I get from my university class is, I thought I knew what it meant to focus, and I
mm,
had no idea what it really meant to focus my
mm,
attention. You know, and really, my students come to embrace it. I one interesting thing is when we're hammering either chisels or nails, I pass out earplugs because it gets really loud. And I had a class where students came in, and the first thing they did was pick up their earplugs and put them in. And I
ah,
said, we're not making any noise. We're really not making any noise today. You don't need your earplugs. And the response was, no, we really like this
mm,
because we never have silence.
mm-hmm.
There's always a noise in our heads,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
If we're not talking to somebody on the phone, we have those things in our ears, and so that's quite interesting. That for my students, it's this new generation, and they've never used a hand tool. I mean, most of my students have never driven a nail with a hammer before my class,
yeah.
uh,
Mm,
but they always have someone's attention and some kind of sound in their head,
mm-hmm.
and they're finally exposed to a situation where they don't, where it's silent.
Mm,
Yeah. So I do try to structure that class like my own apprentice experience. And then
mm,
we also have a session, like a discussion session outside of the workshop, where they have readings, they keep a journal, they write papers, and we have a more conventional where we sort of process what's going on. And
yeah, yeah. No, that's. I mean, it. It is still in a Western school,
yes,
so.
yes.
But I suspect, and please tell me, having a focused time for an intellectual discussion about what's going on must help the focus there too. The students must realize quickly, all right, this the time to talk about this is quite finite. This is
Hmm.
not all we're going to be doing. So I better have some questions,
Mm.
clear, and then use the time and get those answers
mm,
or at least talk and explore those topics,
mm,
uh, and then go back
mhm.
and work, and then come up with, you know, some other questions will bubble up, or thoughts.
There's often from the class, it's really quite amazing and very interesting, the kind of emotional responses it creates. You know,
Mm, mm,
the students, because the students are suddenly struggling with a lot of different feelings, frustration,
mhm,
impatience, all kinds of things. And I think those are some of the most interesting discussions, And I also feel, and when students come to me, a student might take me aside and say, I just can't do this. And,
mm,
and, and what I want them to get at is, you know, the discomfort is part of the goal. Like
mm,
your education and maybe in your life and maybe from your parents have been trying to run away from discomfort, have been trying to
mm,
make everything easy and smooth and cleared away for you. But now you're confronting, this nail that just bends over,
mhm,
and you have to figure that out. I'm not gonna straighten it for you. Um, and it's amazing how for some students it can be a very unnerving and a very uncomfortable experience, but also I think ultimately, an empowering experience. But explaining to them that, yeah, overcoming frustration is a really important thing,
mhm.
and actually doesn't close doors for you, but opens doors for you.
Oh my
I
goodness,
see
yeah.
so many ways in which that apprentice pedagogy turns so many of our conventional notions of education on their head, you know,
Mm.
that the challenges are part of the learning.
Yeah, yeah. Well, starting with the basic assumption, in here, when uh, when a student shows up, right? They show up, they pay their money, and then they are ready to receive. The
Yes.
teacher is then expected to give,
Provide,
and the
yes.
student is expected to receive and try to remember all that. Whereas in Japan, traditionally, all as you started explaining, the whole responsibility of learning is on the student. Like that is your job.
Right.
The teacher is just there as an exponent,
Mm-hmm.
and you, as a student, you gather what you can.
Right.
um, yeah, and it is so different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Having the responsibility of learning, on you. Yeah.
Yeah. And the first thing is kind of actually learning the skills of being engaged. I mean, you have to develop powers of concentration.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm
Mm-hmm.
demonstrating a technique and I'm demonstrating techniques without saying a word,
Mm-hmm.
and when I step away and hand the saw to the student, now they have to do it. So they quickly learn they have to pay attention to everything that I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing. That there's a tremendous amount of nuance. And then also too, as they work, they're in a funny way, what becomes the teacher is the wood and the tools.
Mm-hmm.
They start to teach the student, where does the saw bind? Why does it bind? What can I do to change the wood so that it won't bind? And that's actually where the learning process is taking place. And actually, I've seen students come up with some pretty interesting innovations that even I'd never thought of. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
it's fun to see. It's a challenging class, and it's fun to see when it really works well. It's a great thing when the students just walk into the shop and without a single word from me, They begin to pick up the tools and take up where they left off. And we have 90 minutes of silent work, and then they clean up and go. That to me is a successful class.
Mm. So is that more or less how it happens? They're not in the shop all day. They have other classes, and that's one
Yeah,
class. Or
I've normally taught the course in short terms. So there's a small number of schools nationwide that do winter terms. They'll have an intense 4 week January term where students take just one class.
mm,
So Middlebury College does this. I've taught 4 winter terms there. Bates College does that at the end of the school year. They do a 5 week term. I taught once as a summer term. I taught once. So most of my courses have been in a kind of January term. And yeah, I've yet to design and teach a course that took place over a whole semester. I'm not opposed to that, but that just hasn't come to pass yet.
mm,
And so I have the students, I tell schools, I'm sorry, that I need 40 hours in the workshop. So we have to have 40 hours in the workshop, and then maybe a dozen hours of discussion session outside the workshop. And I think that would describe, in terms of classroom commitment, a typical winter term 4 week class.
mm. So that's about 12 hours a week or so.
Right, something like that. Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah. And
Oh,
then
neat.
I also teach this in a 5 day full-time workshop setting, at boat building schools and craft schools and the like, where
Mm,
same boat, Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day, take a group of students, just like the workshops you teach.
mm.
And we build about 40 hours, typically works out about right
Wow.
for one of
And then
those
how
classes.
many students? I guess depends the size of the boat a bit,
Eight
but
in my workshops. I limit it to 10, so we'll have
okay.
8 to 10 students. And
Mm.
my college classes, it depends on the school. Um, a lot of schools don't want to see fewer than 15 students. I think
Uh-huh.
that's kind of a cost benefit
Mm.
formula. And in some cases, like at Bates College, we built 2 boats.
Ah.
I divided my 15 students into 2 sections, and we built two identical boats.
Mm. And do you have a helper or a shop helper or what's
I've never had a TA or a helper.
mm. Oh, oh, wonderful.
Hmm.
Huh. So why do people take your class? Especially when in a workshop, easier to understand. I can relate because the similar classes I do, but in a university setting, do you have a sense what students, what are students trying to get out of, or are interested in the first place? What they get out of it probably is different than the intent, but
Yeah, I
um,
think students. I think students pretty universally simply think it's cool.
ah,
They open the course catalog and they see a class entitled "Building the Japanese Boat," and they think,
mm,
"Wow, that's cool. I want to do that." And I don't typically think there's much more thought than that. And I do get I get a number of students that are very interested, or at least interested in craft, interested in working with their hands, and they've never had that chance. I've only had a very tiny minority of students that actually had any woodworking experience.
mm,
So, but there's a lot of students who really would like to work with their hands and have never had the chance. So I think there's the quote cool factor,
mm,
and the idea that, yeah, I'd love to try woodworking of some sort. I'm at this liberal arts college. There's no chance to do anything like this. So, yeah.
mm. Oh, how interesting. Yeah. And obviously, here you teach in English, but as you kept traveling to Japan, at some point you must have started picking up the language. You
Oh,
mentioned you had an
yeah,
interpreter the first few
right.
times.
So what I did in my process when early on, early 90s, when I just realized this is what I want to do. I want to, do as much as studying of Japanese boat building as I can. I, kind of picked up very rudimentary Japanese, sort of travel Japanese, how to
Hmm.
catch the train or the bus or whatnot. But I focused very closely on learning the vocabulary of the craft. So
Mm.
what are all the boat parts? What's the names of all the tools, the wood, the techniques, and so on. So I could, sort of stumble through with I mean, if one of my teachers pointed to something and said, go work on the stem, I mean, I understood what they were talking about. When I got that first big grant from the Freeman Foundation, part of that money sent me before I went to Japan to the famous Middlebury College Summer Language School. And I took
Mm.
a summer long course in intensive Japanese. And so
Ah.
that really kick started my grasp of the language. And then, of course, immediately going to Japan and living there for a year really added to that and brought that forward. I mean, particularly when my wife and I were living way up in Aomori, we were the only two English speakers. I don't
Mm.
know, maybe for 50 miles. We were way
Ah.
out in the countryside.
Mm.
So, and every time I go to Japan, my language skills make another jump ahead. So, yeah, at this point, I tell people my general Japanese is kind of intermediate. I'm no language whiz,
Mm.
but I speak enough. I can easily, comfortably travel around and communicate with people. But my ability to talk about boat building
Ah.
with a boat builder is beyond native fluency. And
Mm.
I've had many experiences where I'm talking to a boat builder, a native Japanese is overhearing our conversation, and when the boat builder and I finish speaking, the Japanese person looks at me and says, "I didn't understand a word you two said." But again, that's because
Yes.
we're using all the specific terminology.
Mm.
So, and I'm quite proud of the fact that in my big book, Japanese Wooden Boat Building, in the back is included a glossary of Japanese boat building terms, and I've
Mm.
never seen anything like that published. So I'm quite proud of having put that together because actually as I consciously studied with builders in different geographic areas of Japan because the boats, the designs, the techniques, the materials are different, and I wanted to cover as wide a range as I could. And also the terminology. I mean, with every new teacher there was a pretty significant new vocabulary to learn because they just
Mm.
use different terms for the same things.
Ah.
Yeah.
Different regions.
Yeah. And
Mm.
I mean, Japan is,
Mm.
it's amazing. I mean, it's particularly the language too. They talk about these dialects that are, in some cases, pretty remarkably different than standard Tokyo dialect. And so I
Mm.
had to catch on to that as well.
Mm. Wow. And then how was that for your wife? Does she have
Well, the good thing,
any interest in the culture, or because being there for months?
yeah,
Um,
well, in a year, in one
mm.
case a year. Yeah, so first of all, I'm very grateful that my wife has been incredibly supportive of all this work. I mean, she had a career in museums and specifically museum education, so she gets it. She
Mm.
completely gets it and is quite fascinated with it as well. But she's also she very much loves Japanese paper, washi,
Mm.
and Japanese pottery.
Ah.
And so when she and I are traveling together, I'll be driving the rental car along the coastline looking for boat builders, and she'll be reading, a tour book that says, "Hey, in the next mountain valley, there's the famous papermaking town or a famous pottery town, and so she'll say turn right, head up the into the
Mm-hmm.
mountains, and I have to say some of the most amazing experiences I've had in Japan are because of her and her interests. I
Mm-hmm.
can think of some pottery towns and some papermaking workshops, that she brought me into that were just amazing. And similar, maybe not so much pottery, but like papermaking, a craft where most of the practitioners are elderly and, apprentices are not forthcoming. So,
Mm-hmm.
crafts that are at risk, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's
Hmm.
all around. And what did you think of when you first got started with the Japanese woodwork and the boats? Were you aware the woodworking tools, not only the specific ones for boat building, but in general, the Japanese woodworking tools are a little different than Western tools?
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
when I first went to Japan, I had never touched a Japanese chisel. I mean, the only thing, I had a dozuki
uh, uh,
handsaw. That was it. That was literally, I had water stones. That's it. Those two things. That was the
mm,
only exposure I had to Japanese woodworking. And then getting involved in boat building, yeah, there's some really significant differences in the design of the boats, how the boats are designed, and but really significant differences in how they're put together, how the seams are made watertight. Uh,
mm,
so there was a big learning curve for me, but I also think that as a boat builder, there's just a built-in understanding. You confront a boat builder from Senegal or Venice or Japan, and it's, how do you keep the water out? How do you make a watertight fit?
mm,
So there's I don't know. I think there's kind of a universal understanding of the basics of the craft, and then you get into the details. Though that's where the differences are. So
mm,
yeah. So, and for me, of course, it was just fascinating. I mean, the differences were endlessly fascinating for me. Um,
mm,
so that was a further hook. And then, of course, these elderly masters were just phenomenal craftspeople, and uh, the opportunity to study with any one of them, to me, I felt was amazing. Why
mm.
on earth would I turn that down? So,
Oh my goodness, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's funny because in Japan, I'm often a magnet for the media, and so I've been on NHK television, and I've been in the major newspapers, and the question is always like sort of asked to pose to me by Japanese journalists as, well, why do you want to do this? What's so interesting about this? You know?
Mm,
And I don't know that I can ever get the answer across. Like, well, these are unbelievably skilled craftspeople. Like,
mm,
why wouldn't I want to study with them?
mm,
So, but that's that kind of blind spot within Japan of Japanese themselves not appreciating at all, and not knowing how their woodworking culture is absolutely revered in the rest of the world.
yeah, yeah, that's very common. Well,
Yeah.
in Japan, actually, there is a cultural value put on certain woodworking profession,
Hmm.
like the miyadaiku, the
Right.
temple builder.
Right.
That you may not know, a Japanese person may not know anything that goes into temple building, but if you meet a, in Japan, if you meet a temple builder, there's an instant reverence
Right.
because it is understood that, wow, this is really difficult. This is really involved. the dedication, it's so many years of learning all
Right.
of that, um, but without knowing the details,
Mm,
that they actually, in many ways, other wood crafts that are technically more demanding,
mm,
not to diminish in any way the temple builder,
mm.
but it's been built, culturally, in the cultural ethos, it's been upheld so high. Um,
My thought is, and I'd be curious to your thoughts on this. I feel like that, and this, I may be speaking with just way too broad a brushstroke, but I sort of feel like that respect exists in Japan, again, like you say, because people understand, they have an inkling of what that temple carpenter went through to gather their skills, right?
mm, mm,
But I think the flip side of that is that, that it was hard, it was demanding, there was no pay, and all of that. But
mm.
they emerged through that process, and so they demand a great deal of respect. But the problem is that notion of the apprenticeship now prevented a younger generation from wanting to follow that. Like,
Oh,
well,
it's a really hard sell.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
especially, see, especially when we highlight all the difficulties,
Yes,
and
right.
that's at times it kind of bugs me a bit because
Yeah.
there's little room given to the amazing benefits,
Mm,
how you may feel about yourself, how
mm.
you may grow personally.
Yeah.
What,
That's a
yeah,
that's a great point.
because
Yeah.
that is, if it wasn't for that, it, I mean, just to learn how to make something,
Mm,
for me, not enticing enough to
mm,
stick with it.
mm,
For me, it was, that was important, but it seemed like you can make things many different ways.
mm,
But to learn how to make things in this way, with this level of refinement, and in refinement, I don't mean necessarily polished, but the depth of knowledge that's available to create, all the subtleties.
mm,
Which side of the board should be inside or outside of a
mhm,
boat or on a house for siding.
mm,
Yeah, it doesn't make a huge difference, but there is one that's better than the other. And all of those details, this seemingly endless. So those are interesting things.
mm.
But at the end of the day, also the personal growth, like,
Yes.
wow, to be able to stick with something that seems almost impossible to do, but seeing your teacher do it, unless you think he or she is not same human as you are, then
Mm,
there's got to be a way.
mm,
If I stick with it long enough, there's got to be a way. They
mhm,
can do it unless they have some special ability I don't have. Um, there must be a way for me to figure out how to do that.
mm,
And then sticking with it and then eventually doing it, there is no other way to replicate that feeling
mm.
and how it changes the way you might see yourself. And
Right.
then, hence, how you portray yourself and come across.
Right.
Um,
Right.
there's no substitute for that. No amount of talking in the mirror telling you you're, great or whatever. Th- There's this really is not the same.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's I think a fascinating part that I believe in that Japanese apprentice pedagogy. There's a moral element to it. There really
Hmm.
is. I mean, my teachers, you know, my teachers saw boat building as a calling, you know,
Mm.
and I
Hmm.
think they grew into that. They were forced, in many ways, they were forced into it. They came of age right after World War II, and the country was completely destroyed, and there were absolutely no other opportunities but to go into dad's boat shop. And so
Mm,
that's what they did. But yeah, there's a very powerful, I think, ethic to the crafts in Japan that I don't think exists. I don't feel necessarily exists in the West, not to the same degree, or not in the same way. And that's always really interested me. That it's there's that the apprentice training is both a physical, practical training, but also an ethical training.
mm. I think I don't know that they have a word for maybe,
Mm,
but there is an unspoken understanding in Japan of the value of inner wealth.
mm,
You know, what you cultivate in yourself,
hmm,
and the value of, I mean, to put it in really, really basic terms, like what is it to be a good person?
hmm.
How would you carry yourself in the world to both you feel like a good person,
Yeah. There's a phrase.
contributing.
There's a phrase in German that said he who or they who he who works with wood works on wood or works with wood works on their character.
Oh, that's, yeah, yeah, easy to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Sooner or later, you do have to surrender to the material.
Yeah. There you go.
It
Yeah.
is what it is. If it's not going well, turn back to yourself. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Mm. So yeah, that's fascinating. You briefly mentioned about media. I guess when you're in Japan,
Mm.
you're a little bit tall too, aren't you? At
Yes.
least 6 feet or something, or
I'm over 6 feet. Yeah.
over. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So another reason. But outside of that, living in this day and age, I've seen from time to time you post on Instagram, and then you have a beautiful brand new website. Um, and as it will be in the description. It's Douglas Brooks boatbuilding.com. As woodworkers, as much as we like to be by ourselves in the shop making shavings, today it's, how do you see the importance in your work, in your world, to both social media is one thing, but definitely a internet presence. Um,
Well, it's been helpful for my business. I mean, several of the most lucrative projects that I've done the clients have found me solely via my website. They've needed a Japanese boat and they sat down and Googled that, and up came my site. So that's a practical reason for the site. Uh, I don't feel like I get too deeply into internet and social media. It's pretty easy to share posts on Instagram. I'm interested in sharing what I know. And it's nice to reach out. It's nice to see the feedback, when somebody has a question, and I try to answer all the questions that I receive. Or, can I make a connection for someone in Japan? I've introduced people to craftspeople in Japan, and they've created apprenticeships for themselves. So um, I feel like the teaching aspect of my personality, it's a way to kind of further enhance that and get the word out. And also, I mean, I'm not going to be so grandiose to say that I'm going to save Japanese boat building, but I'm going to try, and it helps me do my small part in that. I always try to include apprentices now on all my projects, and a number of those apprentices or workers or helpers, whatever you want to describe them, they found me through social media. They reached out via my website or my blog or my Instagram. So yeah, it's a useful tool. It was interesting. I did in 2022 and 23, I did the biggest single project of my life. I built 6 Japanese river boats for a downriver tour company. And it was a huge project
In
in
Japan
Japan.
or okay, in
In
Japan.
Japan, yeah. And it was a huge project. And I had assistants. I went and did it over 3 sessions and had assistants for all 3 sessions. I was Instagramming. It was actually the most Instagramming I've ever done until this barrel making thing last winter, where I threw up a lot of Instagram posts. I began to get messages from boat builders all over the world who
Mm,
said, "I will fly to Japan if you'll let me sleep on your floor. I will volunteer with you on this project."
mm.
And I mean, that's not a thing that would have been possible pre-internet, you
Oh
know.
yeah, yeah.
And it was great. And it didn't, I wasn't, I was able to accommodate a couple of people. And I had also got emails from Japanese, and I accommodated them. I had several people, Japanese people, drop in and either just spend a day or several days volunteering with me. But it's got me thinking that, and this is kind of a next step for me. You're familiar with people like Takami Kawai and Tak Yoshino, who are running these like 1 month Japanese woodworking intensives, almost exclusively, I think, for foreigners. But they're running these intensive
Mm-hmm.
workshop classes. And it's made me think really seriously about doing that around a boat building project, and
Yeah.
creating a boat building project in Japan
Mm-hmm.
and offering people a chance to experience this and learn this in a pretty intense, short-term setting, like 3 to 4 weeks. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I did well. Let's just say I'm not ready to go fully live with this, but I am working with a venue in Japan and will be announcing via my social media sometime in the near future. I am going to teach one of my Japanese boat building workshops, my week-long workshops in Japan next year. And
Ah,
so
wonderful.
that could be a start to something bigger, something uh,
Mm,
broader, that would allow for more learning of Japanese boat building.
mm. So, are you dreaming of a maritime museum with a boat shop in Japan?
Well, I have long thought that the only way to save Japanese boat building is to start a school.
Mm,
And I have no doubt that a school could be successful. And what's really prevented me is imagining, I'll say knowing or imagining how I think it would be incredibly difficult to break ground and start a standalone boat building school in Japan. I think the bureaucratic hurdles would be enormous because I've seen Japanese friends try to get things like this off the ground, and just how incredibly difficult and time consuming it is. What
mm,
I think would be much easier and much more doable is that short term model.
mm,
Or conversely, if I were to get another, my riverboat project was 6 months total. If
mm,
I were to get another big commission like that, let's say a 4 month or 6 month boat building project, then I could conceivably say, great, going to handpick 6 student or apprentice workers, however you want to call them,
mm,
and offer them this opportunity to study Japanese boat building.
mm.
That would be much doable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would love it. If if an existing organization in Japan, like a maritime museum, wanted to turn to me and say, "Hey, we want to establish a boat shop. We want to bring you in there. We want you to start teaching boat building or demonstrating boat building, whatever."
Mm.
That would be great because they would take, that would be ready made. But
Oh yeah, yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
me to create that from scratch, I think it
Oh,
would take
that
years.
you
Yeah,
you already wear so many hats. I mean,
right.
being being head of a school, that's more than a full-time position.
Yeah, no, but
Um,
but again, backing up from what I've where I've seen native Japanese
mm,
and the
mm,
time it takes for them to create an organization, register it with the government, get
mm,
city approval. There's the whole visa question.
mm,
Where's my visa that allows
yeah.
me to stay there and do this? It took 18 months for me to get my visa because Japan was closed for COVID. So
Oh,
to build
yeah.
the riverboats, it took 18 months
Wow.
to get the visa that allowed me to enter Japan during COVID and start building those riverboats.
Wow.
Wow is right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard. It's really hard to build a grassroots organization in Japan.
Mm,
Yeah. So yeah, I would like to. I think it would. I think it could just happen so much quicker with a different model, with more of
mm,
like a
yeah.
Takami Kawai model.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
The Japanese carpenter who's been teaching for years now,
Yeah.
first
1 month
out of
intensives.
Kyoto, and
Yeah.
last few years, many, many classes in France,
Yeah.
and then I think he might have been going back and forth
He's
now.
back. Well, yeah, I thought he was back to Japan, but you may be right. He may be back and forth. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
There is a lot of interest in
there is.
learning. Um,
Absolutely. I have no
and
doubt I could fill courses. I have no
yeah,
doubt whatsoever.
yeah,
So
there's
we shall see.
culturally, both here and in Japan, I'm more familiar with it here, but I've seen it through different connections in Japan, how there's a yearning for another way.
Yes.
And not so much an arcing back to a simpler time, not that kind. Something about integrating what we have now, making it richer by engaging our hands. I think
Hmm.
there's there seemed to be a movement.
It's
Um,
definitely a movement.
yeah,
Absolutely a
yeah,
movement. I mean,
yeah.
I would, if you had asked me 15 or 20 years ago, I would have probably said, I think I'm going to be the last Japanese boat builder, because to me, it just seemed like it was a whole bunch of men in their 80s and 90s and me.
Mm,
And I didn't see a way that that was going to change. And now, I'm currently, actively communicating with at least half a dozen young Japanese that want to learn boat building. They
ah,
recognize what's there. They want to do that.
mm,
So yeah, it's great. It's very
it's,
heartening, and it's just
yeah.
how do you find them the means to gain that knowledge? So
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's the challenge.
yeah. Yeah, well, keep moving forward and
Yeah,
ways become revealed.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll start with converting a whole bunch of people in a small town in Maine later this summer.
Yes, yes. This
That's our
summer,
diabolical plan.
there you go. That's the plan. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So you'll be presenting at the main Japanese Woodworking Festival this summer,
Yes.
end of July. And I see on the schedule you're presenting, but you're also doing a boat launch.
Yeah. Well, so the organizers were intrigued by the idea. So one of my students is bringing a boat that we built in a workshop, and um,
Perez. What's his name
Perez,
again?
Alex
Perez.
Perez, yep,
Alex Perez.
lives in the Hudson Valley, and
Mm.
he's going to bring the 21-foot Japanese riverboat that we built at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum a couple of years ago in St. Michael's, Maryland. So he'll bring that over to Maine, which is wonderful of him. He's looking forward to the festival.
Mm. I look
And
forward to meeting him.
yeah, he's a great guy and a very, very passionate woodworker. You'll like him. You'll like him a lot.
Mm.
He'll really enjoy meeting you. So I suggested that I could, for the benefit of the gathering, I could conduct a traditional Shinto boat launching. I mean, it's a very
Mm.
short ceremony. I'll talk about the ceremony, and then we can conduct it with the
Yeah.
boat.
Which body of water?
I thought I kind of thought they said there was a pond nearby, but if not, we can just
No, there is. Yes.
there's a pond. Yeah,
Uh, anyways, we'll find out the details this
yeah,
summer.
yeah.
For sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then I'll do a demo of some of the boat building techniques, like I did at your Brooklyn event.
Mm.
And yeah, I'll
Yeah,
offer books for
wonderful.
sale and happy to talk to people. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm glad the timing is working out this year.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Wonderful. Ah, well, it's been so great chatting,
yeah. Thank you.
and I, yeah, good luck with your many projects,
Yeah, thank you.
and I look forward to seeing you this summer.
Good. Yeah, Jan, thank you very much for this. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the folks putting that festival together. I'm glad I'm going to finally get to go. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it will be. It's been amazing, and
yeah,
I imagine the summer will be no different.
yeah.
Yes.
And Kez woodworkers are the nicest woodworkers in the world.
Oh, well, I'll pass that along.
Do
Yes.
please do, because I mean it. I mean it. It's a great group of people.
Mm.
I've always really enjoyed just seeing how welcoming they are to people coming in with an interest or not knowing what they're interested in. It's really superb. It's a fun thing to see, and I'm happy to do anything I can to support their work.
Oh, what wonderful. I enjoy it so much.
Good.
Yes.
You should.
All right. Okay. Well,
All
be
right.
well. And
Arigato.
arigato. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.